doesn't need any introduction. So many things to be said about what Duncan's contributed to alternative news and for helping waking people up. He has been involved way back in intentional communities, and he also been involved in publishing and the magazine industry even from the 80s. He acquired Nexus Magazine in 1990, is that correct? 1990, and he has been a true pioneer in getting the message out to so many people internationally with Nexus and of a whole range of diverse, holistic topics. I mean, Duncan is really keeping ahead of the curve, and he has a discernment that is rare in this field. He's like a walking encyclopedia. He just knows so much about everything. And when this kind of paradigm shift occurs at a deeper level and people look back and think, well, how did we wake up? Who was out there? I mean, how did the media sort of counteract all this information and so on? Who were those people actually getting the word out here? There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that Nexus Magazine will be a cornerstone when people look back in history and look and realise that it started a long time ago before the internet became popular, a long time back. So Duncan has been there and doing this for a long time, so he's seen a lot of trends come and go, a lot of different ideas come and go. And today he's going to be talking about the big picture and the journey ahead. So he's going to be giving his perspective. He has lots of people coming and telling him all kinds of classified information, people that report sightings, have UFO contactees and experiences that don't go to groups or share their information. So he's privy to a lot of information and an understanding of the big picture that is very rare. And in this day and age of dispersed information, and of course the internet, and there's so much publishing of information everywhere, what Duncan's going to offer is a concentration of wisdom, a concentration of knowledge, which is highly valuable. So this introduction's going on for quite a long time, and we really want to hear from Duncan. Please make welcome the alternative news pioneer, Duncan Roads.
Thank you, Anthony. Can you hear me okay? Everyone hear me okay? Cool. First up, I just want to say a big thank you to Anthony and his volunteers. It takes a lot to do a conference, and we need more conferences like this rather than fewer, so give him a hand, give him a round of applause. Thank you, Anthony. Okay, have you all had time to read the quote on the screen? Yes, you can appreciate that was 137 years ago. And the top journalist at the time, after a few drinks, is basically saying, it's so corrupt, we're so rorted, we put in the media what we're told to put in the media. That's 137 years ago. So what we're experiencing out there at the moment is not a new phenomenon. And pretty much who controls the information out there pretty much controls what you think. Every one of you in the audience has got very strong opinions and ideas about people like Trump, about what's going on in the world, about what's going on with ETs. You can only usually have formulated those conclusions that you have from the information you've gathered, or in some cases, if you're fortunate, with the experiences that you've personally endured or had. So my point is, information is the biggest and most critical key at the moment. We're living in times of incredible and profound change. So the more informed you are, the better it's going to be. Right now, unfortunately, the battle out there is for your attention span and where you go to get your information. In terms of alternative media, these days fewer and fewer people go out there into newsagents and buy newspapers or magazines. And why would you? You've got it 24/7 on the internet, much quicker, often much cheaper. So the whole landscape is shifting for the pre-existing media empires out there. Every day in Australia our population goes up, but every day in Australia the number of people watching channels 2, 7, 9 or 10 goes down. And a few weeks ago you probably saw in the news that Channel 7 filed for receivership, which sent shockwaves through everybody. They're still going to broadcast, but basically the water is going out of the bathtub of all the mainstream media organisations on the planet, including the overseas ones like the New York Times, etc. They're being propped up by some benevolent people who've got agendas out there. And of course, one of the biggest groups of people benefiting through the mainstream media at the moment is the military-industrial complex, which we'll address a bit later. I just want to touch on a couple of things here. This is a Pew Research thing from a couple of years ago, 2016, and if anything, the trend has gotten worse. 6 in 10 Americans are getting their news from social media. Most of them are getting it from Facebook. The problem with that is Facebook has hidden algorithms, which are little formulas, which determine what you're going to see on your news feed. And Facebook don't really care what you're into or what you're not into, but what they are really focusing on is showing you information that you're going to appreciate. So it becomes very insular. Facebook are very hostile to anything to do with alternative health generally. Some very controversial issues like the greenhouse debate, the vaccination debate. What's going on in Venezuela is a battleground on the internet at the moment with people going out there. One of the things that you find, and this is an interesting phenomenon on the internet, you go to different websites and say magazines online. A lot of people like to go down to the comments and read what the comments are saying. Well, those comment sections are so well read and so many stories that many years ago the think tanks, the military industrial complex, pharmaceutical drug companies literally paid an army of people to go out there and put false comments in to totally sway the opinion of people who may be sitting on the fence and they're looking at comments for the first time to get an assessment of, is this a story I should believe? Is this a pill I should swallow in the news? So we call those people trolls or shills, and now and again a person will come forward and say, look, I was paid by the military industrial complex or the State of Israel. The State of Israel has been very proactive in paying people to go out there and distort any debate on the whole Palestinian Middle East situation. And people who stand up and say that we should research both sides of the vaccination debate, they're called anti-vaxxers, and there's a lot of people paid out there to go and just literally hate on you on your Facebook page. Quite a few high-profile anti-vax activists have literally nearly had breakdowns just from the sheer amount of death threats they have and harassment they get. My advice is, when it comes to dealing with skeptics and the such, is to ignore them. One of the things I found is when I'm challenged by skeptics, or when people say, what do you think about the skeptics out there? I sort of say, well, who are the real skeptics in this situation? Mainstream society says vaccines are safe and effective. We say they're not, so we're sceptical of what society is saying. Mainstream society says there's no such thing as aliens, there's no evidence that aliens have ever visited here. And we say, well, you know, we're sceptical of that. We think there is evidence out there in a lot of different forms. So I would say to people that you guys are actually the true skeptics when it comes down to the definition of what's going on in society. If you're challenging what society says, you're the skeptic. So next time you have an argument with a skeptic friend, assuming they're still out there causing arguments, pull the rug out from under their feet and say, well, you're not even a skeptic. You're actually a person who's out there upholding the dictates of the social mantra, which is literally what it's become. Okay, I've got 45 minutes to do this, so I've got to speed through some of my stuff. Oh yeah, this is a favourite of mine. Let me just make sure I'm up to it. Okay, now in the alternative media out there on the internet, and there's a lot of alternative media sites, a lot of alternative writers and bloggers and journalists, and of course most of them need to make a living if they can. So what's happened is you've now got alternative media sites which are fabricating news using good buzzwords. One of the favourites recently is what's going on in the Antarctic, because everyone has heard rumours of people going down to the Antarctic, Obama, past presidents, the head of the church in Russia. But there are fake news, there are alternative news sites out there which fabricate news. It sounds believable, it doesn't. I wanted to go through a couple of them. YourNewsWire.com, notorious for starting incredible but bogus stories. I've singled them out in particular because the guy who runs that, a guy called Sean was David Icke's former business partner in the failed People's Voice TV venture. Anyone remember the People's Voice? Anyone here donate to it? A few years ago there was a massive crowdfunding campaign and David Icke got up and said, everyone here know who David Icke is? Yeah, he was a footballer in Britain who became a Greenie spokesperson who then got into the New Age, and one day in 1992 on national TV in Britain he announced to the stunned world that he was the Son of God, and unless you changed your evil ways by the end of the year the world would be destroyed. He fell from stardom in the UK and went into a bit of oblivion I mean, who gets on national TV and says they are the Son of God and expects to be taken seriously? He was wearing turquoise robes at the time. So he was a hero, and he was the hope for a lot of British people until he made that statement. He went into seclusion for a while, then he got hold of some Nexus magazines and reinvented himself as a conspiracy writer. And if you get his first book, Robots Rebellion, to his credit, he's listed Nexus Magazine as the source for nearly every chapter in his book, and we thought that was fantastic. I'm not running the guy down, but be clear, he's not an originator of research, he's a regurgitator, and a good one. David Icke is a very passionate speaker, and on his world tours, he's stitched together a pretty good picture of what he believes is going on, and not too many people disagree with it in some general sense. So in other words, he's actually woken up a lot of people. But getting back to the people's voice, I know a lot of people who donated a lot of money. They raised hundreds of thousands of pounds, and they got so excited with their potential, they continued the crowdfunding and raised hundreds of thousands of pounds more. But the whole thing went belly up in the matter of months. And this was a big deal, especially to people like me, because there's a lot of people out there who have been crying out for a while. We need some media which represents what we think instead of the mainstream. How do you break into that and get into alternative media with such gusto? So David Icke, being a very powerful figurehead, was the rallying point, and he was the instigator of it too. They raised a lot of money, a lot of ego and bun fights, and David left and Sean left. But what was interesting is when David and Sean left and the thing closed down, there was £250,000 missing, and neither David or Sean have ever addressed that to anyone's satisfaction. And there's still some very upset and angry people out there. Sean went on to set up yournewswire.com, and he is out there fabricating stories literally for money. The more clicks you get to your website, the more money you make. That's the only motive. On YouTube, there are several people who do the same thing, although they don't have an alternative media background. They're just into money and into ripping people off. If you see any YouTube clips about UFOs or space monsters and it's got the logo Secure Team 10, you can guarantee it's been fabricated. They are notorious all over the internet. Many forums ban YouTube clips from that site on their forums. Alien Defence Group, ADG, or another one, and there's a bunch of them. So where do you go to get your news these days is what a lot of people were starting to say. So a few years ago, I came up with an idea and created a thing called the Alternative News Project, which we was trying to monetise by charging a $5 a month subscription. But already people were getting so much information on the internet for free that they don't want to pay $5 a month, and I get it, but you've got to go with the times. So I've come up with a different way of monetising this, which will be through advertising. But I want to point this out. How many people here use this nexusnewsfeed.com? You want to make mention, you want to remember that, nexusnewsfeed.com, it's very easy. What we do is we go out there and every day we put up between 30, sometimes 100 stories a day. And we get them from every topic imaginable. They're the 12 main categories we have. Channels is a separate one. Inside that category, you've got 6 subcategories. Ancient mysteries of that area, blah, blah. And inside each of those, you've got what we call topics. And I just want to blow my own horn a bit more and tell you how fantastic this is. I just want to... when you register, it's very simple. We only ask for your email address. I'll just show it. Email address, we ask that you put in the country, the state and the region, and that's because we're putting up items. Sometimes it might be, a news item might be, say, a fracking meeting that's going on in regional New South Wales. If you've ticked the fracking topic in there somewhere, you'll get everything to do with fracking on your newsfeed. This is basically a totally personalisable newsfeed. You go in there and when you register, apart from putting in your location, you're ticking what subjects you're interested in. It can be just crop circles, it can be a bit of everything, and you can even use it anonymously. You don't have to log in. If you use it anonymously, these tabs here become filters. So if you want to see health and healing, tap that and your newsfeed will rearrange itself and only health and healing articles will be in there. And if you wanted to just look at Big Pharma, subcategory, and that's all the topics inside Big Pharma. If you just want to see, say, Codex stuff, you tap that, and you've got anything to do which has mentioned Codex in the thing too. The more you explore that, the more you'll see how amazing it is. It is really something. There's nothing like it on the internet, and it's free. We're growing it. It's growing very, very fast. My goal is to turn it into something like an alternative news agency. News agencies, Reuters, Associated Press, UPI, Agence France Presse. News agencies like that are where everyone sends central stories into, and then they distribute them to media organisations like Channel 7 or Channel 9 or Channel 10 or the New York Post, etc. I want to create the first alternative news agency, and we're on the way to it. So one day we'll be able to license out parts of the feed to third world countries who want to include alternative media in their pay TV package instead of porn or sport, etc. We'll have alternative media in there one day, and that's where we're going. So this is a highly personalisable thing. You register on there, put in your email address, put in there what country and stuff you live on, and then you tick what topics you're interested in. I do recommend you register and tick the topics you're interested in, because right now, if you don't tick specific topics and you select everything, you're going to have thousands. I mean, there's literally 20,000 something news items on there right now, going back several years, and you want to filter that down. Anyway, that's enough of that, but use it. It's totally free and it's amazing. And we do weed out, this is the big thing, we go through and we weed out fakes. There are stories sometimes that appear on those email lists you get which are really nice and fluffy and friendly. Some of them are 5 years old, but they've been dragged out because they've got all the right buzzwords in there and you're going to click on them. And a lot of you probably don't know they're 5 years old, and you think, well, you know, how can they be banning this thing again? I already thought they banned it 5 years ago. So we go through and we make sure whoever wrote the original item is attributed, the date they wrote it is attributed, and the source from which it came from. So if anyone's out there stealing work, we go back to the original source and we credit the original writers. And when you open on an item, you can link back to the original writer and researchers. So it's a way of supporting the dwindling number of researchers and writers and bloggers out there in this field. We send traffic back to their sites. Now, chewing up my time here. Okay, I originally had this talk, 45-minute talk. I had 3 15-minute sections: news and trends, geopolitics, and ETs and UFO stuff, which I know most people want to hear about. Okay, let's go into geopolitics, because this talk is built a bit on the premise I'm going to give you a bit of an overview. Now, to give you an overview on what's going on in the world at the moment, how many people here could stand up and tell me what a petrodollar is if I asked them? Right. Okay, you need to know this. You've probably heard the phrase petrodollar, but you probably glazed your eyes and turned the channel and watched something else. The petrodollar empire is coming to an end. It pretty much represents the military-industrial complex of the American empire. But I'll tell you what it is, because the petrodollar empire has been running for decades, and it's all about oil, as you can imagine. Now, imagine you're a country like New Zealand. Even though you can dig up your own oil and refine it if you're feeling really brave, every country in the world is basically pressured or forced through trade agreements and security and military agreements. If you want to buy oil from your country, you can only do it one way, and every country on the planet has agreed to this, apart from the renegades, being Libya, Syria, North Korea, I think Iran. So if you want to buy oil, you first have to go to the US Treasury and you have to buy shitloads of American dollars. You cannot buy oil in anything else except US dollars. Did you know that? No. When you buy those US dollars, you then take them to one of two places. You take them to the New York oil bourse or the London oil bourse, and you can only buy your barrels of oil from those two places. So it's a rort. It's a total rort. It's always been a rort. But do you ever see the journalists on 60 Minutes or Current Affair or anyone even talking about it? No, because they lose their jobs if they even mention, can we do a story on rorts like that? So it's an amazing thing which has been hidden in plain sight, and every country's politics is centred around it. Now, what's going on in the Middle East at the moment? You're told there's a civil war in Syria because some evil guy called Bashar al-Assad is this evil person who's torturing and killing people, which is not really true. What America does, and I should actually stand back and define America. You know, in all the James Bond movies where you've got the evil genius, the brain guy, and then you've got the arch villain with the iron hand or some U-boot, lead hat thing. There's always a villain who, at the end James Bond's going to have to duke it out with. And then there's a bunch of henchmen, some sexy woman with a stiletto, etc., who are going to be the second last to be killed by James Bond. Well, in the global scene, you've got the evil genius, the brains of what goes on are pretty much hidden in Europe amongst the royal families. They own shares in what we call the military-industrial complex. But their main henchman, their main bully boy, who they send around to bash up anyone who doesn't pay up on time or wants to change the rules, is America and the American military machine. That's the bully boy, that's all it is. America is this totally brainwashed country full of quite nice but very dumb people who just go ape over any emotional stimulus that's put their way. They'll go and defend democracy and freedom just so quickly and easily, and they'll kill anybody who gets in their way, and they're the perfect war machine. So they're the bully boy. The henchmen in this scenario are Australia, New Zealand, Canada, some of the European countries, Holland, the usual suspects, the ones who are always trotting off after America in every war that they go into. And in Australia, we've made it like part of our national identity. And we're proud of ourselves for going off and being cannon fodder for the military-industrial complex. It's really, really cunning, it's really stupid. My chest pells up with pride when I see all the fanfare and the glory. And then after I slap myself across the face and realise what's going on, I sort of think, well, who can you go and tell this to? They'll kill you in the streets right now if you go out on the Anzac Day and tell them all this stuff, that they're just stupid people for sending off their kids for cannon fodder for a military-industrial complex over some absolute imagined war on freedom, etc. Now, getting back to Syria, because this is where it's all coming down to the nub, and it's an interesting time to talk about this. There was never a civil war in Syria. Basically, Syria is geographically situated where there are lots of oil pipelines going through from the east to the west and from the north to the south. And you can imagine the petrodollar empire backed up by America's military machine and its allies. You can imagine the rest of the world probably get together every now and again and they go, those bloody Americans, we've got to do this thing. And if they make too much noise, their country gets destabilised, like Venezuela right at the moment. And you get told, this person's corrupt or this person's evil, and they tell you there's a civil war going on and one half of the civil war has asked for our help, so we've got to go in there, which is the Syrian situation. Every country has got a dissident in there who doesn't like the government. And if that person rings up the American government and says, hey, I want to take over this country, will you help me? The American government, if it suits their plans, will get up on the press release the next day and say, we've been asked to support the oppressed people of this country, and we're going to go in and we're going to bomb the crap out of these people until the bad guys say, freedom's been restored. It's just total nonsense. Getting back to Syria. This is serious. Okay. The petrodollar empire has had lots of enemies who've been growing in strength, and countries have been positioning themselves over the last few years. You've heard of the emergence of BRICS, B-R-I-C-S, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, forming an economic bloc. It may be going into a military bloc, we don't know, but they're certainly looking after each other economically. Another organisation to keep an eye on is the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation. The Shanghai Cooperation Organisation. It's got Russia and China basically working together on a military strategy. So the petrodollar hasn't been popular and people have been rallying against it. And what do you do to rally against the petrodollar empire? You basically put in your own infrastructure, and that's what's been going on over the years. And pretty much everything to do with Iraq and Iran and Syria is all about fighting pipelines. All the hot spots. This is fascinating. ISIS come up out of nowhere, and guess where the places they go and they sit on are the exact places the pipelines go through, and they're attacking the enemy pipelines of the American empire. So everybody in my type of work knows ISIS is a total creation of the Americans, the Brits, the French and the Israelis. And these Australian people who go over there and say they're bombing ISIS, most of the time they're dropping ammunition and supplies to ISIS people. The number of times it's been reported even in the mainstream press, but you don't see it because it's on page 20 of some newspaper that you're not even buying anymore. But America has given so many weapons, so much intelligence information. There have been pockets of ISIS people raided and captured, and they found incredible types of documents from Israelis, the head of Israeli intelligence giving them orders. It's not just Israel. America, Britain, France and Israel are all behind ISIS. The crazy people who go out and join this fanatical religious cult and blow themselves up, I mean, they've got to be the epitome of the most brainwashed people on the planet, considering that they're actually not supporting anything to do with a religious agenda at all. ISIS is totally about protecting American pipelines, absolutely 100%. And for those who want to get into weird stuff, ISIS also had a second agenda depending on what parts of Syria they were in. Several ISIS groups were tasked to go and do some very weird archaeological digging. In fact, I had an email about a year and a half ago from Gordon Duff, who runs Veterans Today. He's a bit of a controversial character, but he's CIA and he has the world's largest private intelligence network at his disposal. And he sent me some documents that the Syrians had captured and passed on to him, which were from a very high up Israeli sort of think tank type of Freemason organisation, and they were tasking this particular ISIS outfit to go and dig up, to go and find the second Temple of Solomon, and to dig up a whole lot of weird stuff in there, a bit like Raiders of the Lost Ark. So every time there's something going on in the world, there's usually a secondary agenda. Now, getting back to this point here, it's not over what's going on in Syria. America could be instructed tomorrow, and believe me, Trump went in opposing all this, but somebody said to Trump, you either do what you were told or you're out. So Trump has reversed so many of his things he said he wouldn't do, and he's basically totally following the American military-industrial complex at the moment, which has really upset a lot of people. It all comes down to this: will America allow the opposition to have their pipelines go through? And I want to just touch on a point which I'm going to bring up in the ET section of the talk. What time do I finish?
Plenty of time, keep going.
Okay.
Don't worry about the time, just keep going.
Okay, generally speaking, the fear is that you've got this sense of, well, if we can't have the control of this region, nobody is going to be able to control it, and we will raise the landscape, we'll destroy the infrastructure, we'll just make it uninhabitable so no one else can have it. That is a sort of sense that we're working against. I like to believe that the tide has turned and the petrodollar is going to have a quiet, managed transition from what it has been to where it's going. I would like to think that that is what is happening right now, but it could all go belly up and you could see an incredible shit fight going on in the Middle East over that, and that would be the end of it. Russia and its allies and other countries are going to get their pipelines through, in my opinion. I just don't see the current petrodollar empire, I don't see that they're rallying support. Already Saudi Arabia and Qatar have had a fallout. Qatar has got to have been the biggest slut country out there. They would literally sell anything to anybody. Qatar were the people who funded and trained and became the go-between for the civil war in Libya, when there was never a civil war in Libya. I went to Libya several times in the 1980s. Gaddafi flew me over there with a few other journalists, etc. The first time because I was researching conspiracy theories for Simply Living magazine in the early to mid 80s, and someone said to me, oh, Colonel Gaddafi's into conspiracy theories, and I sort of ring up the Libyan people in Melbourne at the Libyan Arab Cultural Centre, and I spoke to a guy called Robert Pash in his offsider, and they said, yeah, Colonel Gaddafi has been talking about the coming New World Order and a move to a cashless society, and Colonel Gaddafi is saying, if you don't want to be part of the New World Order, if you don't want to be part of the cashless society, why don't we all us African countries get together and put some resources into a central bank, and we'll control that bank and we'll lend it out to African countries without all these horrible conditions that the IMF and the World Bank lend money out to. Oh man, as soon as Gaddafi did that, he went from being, accepted and nice and worked with to terrorist enemy number one, and he was on the news over and over and over. He was never a dictator, he was never a terrorist. He didn't even have castles or fancy cars. He lived in a tent. He was a genuine and quite a spiritual guy if you research where he came from in the desert. He came from a small tribal family. I don't know if I've got time to mention, when I was over there the first time in researching Colonel Gaddafi's conspiracy theories, it was a few months after the Americans had bombed. 14th of April 1986, Americans bombed Tripoli, and a whole lot of weird stuff happened. Gaddafi was rumoured to have disappeared. They thought they killed him for a while, But one of the security guards from Gaddafi's tent came to me because he knew I was into UFOs, and he said there was a huge stationary UFO over Tripoli the night the Americans came out of nowhere and just bombed Tripoli. And a lot of Libyans believe that Gaddafi was beamed up to the UFO for 12 hours or so. He never spoke publicly about it, but he definitely believed in UFOs. Gaddafi was good friends with Louis Farrakhan. Who knows who Louis Farrakhan is? He's the head of the Nation of Islam in America, the big black Muslim organisation. Nothing to do with ISIS, they predate ISIS by a long time. But he's probably the most powerful black Muslim in America, Louis Farrakhan. He's had a UFO abduction experience, which he wrote about in his newsletters. In the 1970s, he was abducted into a UFO consciously. He didn't need hypnosis to recall it. He was shown several probable futures of the planet and came back down, and he integrated some of it into his stuff. Castro in Cuba was another friend of Gaddafi's, and what bonded those three a lot was their belief in UFOs and the fact that we're not alone on this planet. And I could talk for another day on all that, but I haven't got the time. Okay, Putin and Russia. This is another interesting thing. About 10 years ago, Nexus got invited over to Russia. The Russians wanted to publish Nexus in Russian language, which really made me feel pretty darn good about myself, and so we flew over to Russia. And we met our contact guy. Our contact guy was a UFO researcher called Valery Uvarov, who has probably been seen on the UFO circuit for quite a few years. He spoke at least 2 of our conferences. Valery's a short guy, but he was like the go-to person in Russia for anything to do with paranormal, UFOs and unexplained. He was on the equivalent of like Ancient Aliens in Russia before Ancient Aliens came along. So my point is, you walk around in the streets of St. Petersburg with Valery, people come up to him asking for his autograph. He's well recognised. And he was sort of in charge of, talking to me. Anyway, I want to cut a long story short. We go to the National Security Academy, which is the outfit that sponsored me to come to Russia, the National Security Academy. This amazing, weird building in St. Petersburg, very old, but kept secret. The National Security Academy turned out to be created by Putin himself with the support of the then head of the Duma. And there's armed guards outside. Obviously he had enemies in Russia that he didn't want to know about it. The National Security Academy, I learned, was a place that Putin had created where he wanted everything to do with UFOs centralised, military and civilian. He had already put out a thing going around to try and find all the psychic and gifted kids in Russia, star children you want to call them or whatever. Oh, there's the... yeah, I should have shown you those pictures for the previous wave anyway. So yes, so there were classrooms of kids of different age groups who were demonstrating and practicing psychic powers. We actually had a demonstration. I walked into a room at random and was invited to write something down on a piece of paper, and they got this Russian guy up who would have been 18 or 20, and they were putting a scarf around his head and facing him the other way and bringing me a pen and paper and say, write something down on the paper in English and he'll tell you what you wrote it. And I thought, oh no, if I write something down on a piece of paper, I'm going to be using my mind to think out the words, and if he can pick that up, then that's not good enough. I want something better. So I happened to have a copy of the latest issue of Nexus under my arm, and I'd come straight from Australia. Nobody in Russia had seen it, and it was in English, and I didn't have it open in front of me, so my mind wasn't reading it. And so I said, okay. I said, on page 2 of the magazine, rolled up under my arm, is my editorial. I said, how about he reads that out to me? And this Russian guy facing the other way was reading. They picked him because he had the best command of English language. That's why they picked him. But apparently any kid in the class could have done what he did. Blindfolded, facing the other way, and the magazine's shut and rolled up in my arms, he started reading to me the first sentence of my editorial, telling me in English, and words he couldn't pronounce, he spelled the bloody things out. That's not even called remote viewing, but that was one classroom of people in there. Anyway, I want to get back to the point. So I said to Valerie, what is the National Security Academy and what are you doing here? Why are you doing it? And this is the important part. Valerie, who is a real Putin's man, and I've got to stress why Putin is loved. Putin was the only public official no one could bribe. After the Iron Curtain came down, bribery and corruption was the name of the day, but there was one public official in the St Petersburg mayor's office at some lowly position. Nobody could bribe this person. He became quite well known because nobody could bribe him. He became more well known in the West and was mentioned in quite a few diplomatic pouches about this curious person who couldn't be bribed. That's why the Russians love him. That's why they trust him. He didn't take bribes, and the Americans hate him because he didn't take bribes. I'm not saying he's God or the perfect person, but that, whether it was a calculated strategy or whether it represents his true spirit, I don't know. Now, the interesting part about why did Putin create the National Security Academy? Putin told his people running the academy, he said, this is what's going to happen. He said, one day Russia will wake up and the West will not be there as we know it. He didn't say what's going to destroy the West or why it's not going to be there. We don't know if it's disease or alien invasion or a comet or war or tsunamis or Yellowstone or all of the above. He just wanted the Russian people to be aware that on the day they wake up and the West is not there anymore, he wants the trains to run, the food distribution system to stay intact. He didn't want the Russians to go into a type of emotional, intellectual, psychic shock. He wanted the infrastructure of the country to keep running. And to do that, he felt it is really important to bring the Russian people up to speed on everything to do with UFOs, and in general he wanted the Russian people to know and accept that we're not alone out there, and that our origins may be very different to what we are told, and that there could be other life forms sharing this planet that we're not available to see or know about, and things like that. And to do this, he wanted to embark on a campaign of billboards, concerts, conferences, books, TV shows and magazines. And rather than reinvent magazines doing it, they picked Nexus out of the West and thought we were representative of the direction they wanted to go and would help educate the Russian people. And so for a couple of years Nexus was in Russian while this whole thing was going on. I don't know whether Putin still holds to that idea or concept. The National Security Academy still does go, and it still does do events of that nature, but not as aggressively. Nexus, there was an internal dispute. Nexus was closed down, mainly because they couldn't get any money out of the retail shops in Russia. They got the magazine printed and out there and read, but they couldn't collect any money from it. There's still a bit of corruption in the infrastructure. So Putin's a very interesting man, and keep an eye on what he does. I take the time to read his interviews. Every now and again Putin does a 6-hour interview with journalists. Worth reading. You learn a lot about the world. And it makes you when you read how Putin talks to journalists, you actually learn information on levels you didn't even realise. It's in huge contrast to the crap the politicians in Australia and Britain and America just blather. I mean, there is no comparison. So for that reason, Putin is growing in popularity in Russia. In America. I think more Americans would like Putin to be their president than would not. I mean, I'm serious. It's heading that way, and these are Americans are really taking the time to, America traditionally hates Russia. It's in their DNA to hate Russia because they've been mind controlled for decades. So for that to be happening is quite significant. Okay, 5:38. Do I go to 6 or 5:45?
You can go to 6.
Do you guys want to stay till 6? Yeah. You poor buggers. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay, I want to touch on something called civilizations. I call it civilization, gods and priests. Now, you all have this history of the world in your minds about what went on in the past, but I want to summarise and encapsulate and make you look at it from a different point of view. For most of human history, you had, well, we call them primitive, but you had tribal families wandering around. Sometimes tribal families would work together on some resource collection, or sometimes they would compete. All these tribal families have the similar sort of historical background. Beings from the stars came down and mated with them, and one tribal family was sort of anointed as the chosen ones and often intermarried with these beings from the stars. All the beings from the stars I'm referring to look exactly like humans. Maybe they had 6 fingers and were a foot or so higher, longer lifespan, but they had fancy spaceships and they came down. And what they did was interesting. They created what we call civilizations, and by civilizations I'm talking about, they got lots of people from wandering around in the forest, living in the same place. They had streets, stone buildings, law enforcement. Really interesting, they gave them agriculture, engineering, water purification, animal husbandry, agricultural techniques, modified grains and things so you could sustain more population. But what's really interesting, every civilization have got a couple of things in common. The people in charge of them we generically call priests. Priests. Going back to Egypt, you probably know, and in some of the Rama Empire, the priests are very interesting people because priests control who marries who. You always had to get permission from the priests before you could marry, especially if you were in the royal families. The priests basically, if you wanted to become a king of a country, you had to get some high up priest or a pope or the top priest to anoint you, otherwise the people wouldn't follow you. The priests have had incredible power throughout history. Tens of thousands of years. The priests are the ones who keep coming up with the generic Christ story. Did you know that there were 16 civilizations before Jesus came along which had exactly the same Christ story? A saviour born usually on December 25, born of a virgin, heals the sick, raises the dead, gets in trouble with the local law enforcement and often is killed or executed on a hill, mostly between two other criminals, and the dates vary at that point. The Roman Catholic Church, on the 16th incarnation of this fairy tale, decided to steal the dates of Easter, which was the festival of Astarte, which was a pagan set of dates, but there was a lot of people in Europe celebrated those dates, so that's when Jesus, in the myth number 16, was resurrected and came back to life. But it's an age-old story. So who has the lifespan? Who has the agenda across so many thousands of years to perpetuate the same story on mankind over and over and over? You should be reading between the lines with what I'm saying and appreciating the power of the Vatican in all this, because if the priests from the word go were the ones that were sort of connecting the people to the gods, where do you think the Vatican comes into it? The Vatican connection with UFOs and ETs of a not so nice nature is there, and much deeper than many people dare to say. The other interesting thing about civilizations is all of these civilizations decided for some reason that gold was the most important thing to be dug up out of the ground. The natives, the Aboriginals, no native culture in existence ever decided that gold was so important to their existence that they got to go out there and they got to dig and risk their lives and they got to get it and purify it and wear it and go all this sort of stuff. No, the native tribal cultures, they wore rings or they made jewellery or flowers, naturally occurring things. But suddenly all these civilizations, all the gods that came down, basically wanted lots and lots of human beings to go out there and dig gold. That was the whole point of a civilization. They weren't doing favours, they were just lazy pirates. We've got spaceships we call UFOs. So take half of these aliens out there off the pedestals you've got them on and realise that a heck of a lot of aliens, if not all of them, are serving their own agendas. They're just another life form out there trying to survive. Humans are one life form out there trying to survive. We actually share a planet with billions of life forms on it, and yet we worry about, is there life out there and how are we going to treat it and are they going to eat us? I mean, when you think about it, look at the way humans as one life form treat every other life form on this planet. Do you think other life forms out there think that we're mature enough to go out and mingle with life forms off this planet, given how we treat the life forms on this planet? I mean, we don't even recognise the sovereignty of most life forms on this planet. We see most life forms on this planet as to be used or eaten. Mind you, in the extended version of my talks, I talk about something called loosh, and it's no accident that every life form on this planet has to kill and eat another life form to survive, except for plants. Plants are the only life form on this planet that don't kill other life forms to survive. Every other life form, regardless of size, down to the microscopic, up to us. And it doesn't stop here. There are life forms off this planet which eat humans and eat lambs. I was at a conference in Sydney and someone was talking about how they saw these poor children in some base and the reptilians were basically feeding off them or feeding off their energies or feeding off their blood, and people were feeling really bad and horrific and, you know, this is terrible that this is happening to us. But I mean, and I agree, I wouldn't want it to happen to me or my children, but I've got to say, you know, Our favourite foods, if you're a meat eater, are the young succulent lambs or the beautiful juicy rabbits. I mean, it's no different. We're doing to life forms below us and thinking, well, that's normal and natural, you know. We go down to the supermarkets and all these bits of dead sheep in the rack, you know, and we think, oh, I'll have that tonight and this one next night. We have no guilt, we have no shame, we have no qualms about it. But if someone above us does the same to us, it's like, oh my God, you know. We've got a long way to go, and that's one of the things. So I want to stress also here, because I'm coming up to 6 o'clock in 15 minutes. Okay, a few very other interesting points here. Let's see if I've got a clip. Okay, this feeds into the agenda of it as well. There's a few things here which UFO researchers don't ever seem to work out or talk about. One of them is the military-industrial complex really want people interested in UFOs to buy into the fear side of it. They want you to believe that we're under attack, that there's hostile aliens out there, and I mean, there are aliens out there that would probably happily eat us, and there are aliens out there who don't. Mind you, I think that if you went up to a cow one day that you were going to eat, and I think if the cow turned to you and looked deep in your eyes and said, please don't eat me today, I've woken up and I've become self-aware and I don't really want to be eaten. Would you actually continue eating that cow? No. Well, that's sort of how a lot of aliens have interacted with humans. It's like, oh my God, I thought you were primitive. What do you mean, you're talking to me? No, that sort of thing has happened. There's lots of, my experience over the years has taught me there are lots of different life forms out there, call them aliens or whatever, coming here for lots of different reasons. Some of them are physical and some of them are non-physical. Some of them have a genetic connection to humans from the distant past and therefore have a right to be here because of virtue of their frequency matching ours. Others are just tourists and are told to just keep off and just observe from a distance. The most interesting information comes from the ones who don't live in the space-time continuum. By the space-time continuum, I mean the physical universe in which matter and time exists. But there are realms of existence where no time exists. And that's where every one of you come from. There's not one single person here who is not an immortal being of spirit inside a physical body. And if you're an immortal being of spirit, you're not born on this planet. You don't materialise the miracle of birth. You've come from somewhere else and you've chosen to experience life on this planet. And I've got to say, the general sense is if you come to planet Earth to have a physical life, whether male, female, or and you can pick it in the 20th century or back in caveman times, it's considered only the brave souls from the omniverse come and experience life down here. And quite a few aliens who've had contact with humans and they've written them all down or talked about them. There's a few things in common which are very interesting. You don't have the experience of an individual existence in most other alien civilizations. Most alien civilizations appear to be telepathic or hive mind. So the experience of being an individual is quite unique for a lot of aliens. They don't comprehend it, they don't understand it. In fact, they fear it because they know one day they need to experience that as part of their evolution. So in that context, people who have lives on Earth are actually more advanced representatives of a variety of non-human civilizations who've chosen to continue their spiritual evolution on this planet, believe it or not. Also, aliens don't generally have such a strong emotional existence as we do here on Earth. And it's quite overcoming for a lot of them. Right now, as far as I'm aware, there's basically two ways to get to this planet. You can land your ship or pop into existence from somewhere else inside the space-time continuum. And way number two of getting here is you're born through the birth canal as a being and taking on a physical body. The deal, and this is pretty unanimous for all the out-of-body researchers and people who've read Robert Monroe's books, the deal seems to be when you choose to have a lifetime on the planet, you pretty much choose to forget who you were before you signed up. So it's like getting on a fairground ride on the Gold Coast. As soon as you get in the ride, you forget that you were somebody who came along and chose to get on the fairground ride, and you're so caught up in the experience of it, and that is what's in front of you. That is what the human experience is all about, and it's meant to be that way. You're not meant to work out what's going on while you're here because it basically underwrites the whole experience of it, of why you're down here. Okay, so now, another thing ufologists don't really seem to have worked out or pointed out is In the last 200 or 300 years, mankind has had a very big technological jump. You all agree on that? What you probably don't know is why we had the lid. What stopped us progressing technologically for hundreds of years? Well, it was the Vatican. It was against religious law. It was a sin to make any machinery. It was the work of the devil. The very first people to come up with the loom, the motorised loom in America, they had to do it with their windows, blinds shut at night so the neighbours wouldn't report them. And that was just for a mechanised knitting and weaving machine, which took off after that. So the Vatican had put the lid on everything to do with technologically progressing this civilization. But about 200 or 300 years ago, maybe less, most of our growth technologically, I would argue, has been a direct result of extraterrestrials coming to this planet physically or non-physically and interfering with visions, etc. We have been given the information, we've developed it ourselves, but we have been given this information by non-humans. So we've been upgraded technologically by lots of different alien civilizations working deliberately to do it. And the more you start looking for examples of this, the more you start finding some beauties. My favourite is, where is the dude? Okay. I'm using Wikipedia here, but usually I don't use Wikipedia on anything controversial. Wikipedia hates alternative medicine. They hate me. They hate anybody who stands up. It's a skeptic-run organisation, and if it's a controversial topic you're looking up on Wikipedia, you're wasting your time. If it's just a nerdy topic, anything to do with science, oh, you'll find nerdy science stuff on there, as long as it's not controversial. So, hollow Earth theory, expanding Earth theory, the electric universe theory, the theory of the existence of the ether. Don't waste your time on Wikipedia. But for dudes like this guy, George Ellery Hale, yeah, you can see there, he's basically Mr. Super Telescope. The reason we've got our telescopes the way we have is because of this guy. Now what's interesting with this guy, look at the time period he's working in, late 19th century, early 20th century. He basically came up with a technology which gave us the biggest telescopes to look out there into the universe, and he really made some incredible breakthroughs. But he didn't make those breakthroughs. Every time he came to a technological or scientific dead end and he needed to overcome something, a little green man would pop into existence in his room when no one else was around, and they would have hours of conversation, very technical and scientific, always relating to light and optics and etc. And after those conversations, his breakthroughs would occur. He'd be, you know, famous and written up, and papers and funding and new telescopes. And after the kerfuffle died down, he would go and admit himself into the insane asylum for a few weeks to a few months at a time. That's how upset he was that he was getting all the acclaim. I mean, it's not even hidden knowledge. It's in his book, etc. They sort of think that he maybe had a mental aberration. But this is not uncommon. The more you research, the more you find there's been outside stimulus affecting the scientific growth of this planet. So they've upgraded us technologically for a reason. Maybe there's something going to happen in the future, I don't know. Okay. I'm nearly there. I mean, I can pull a few extra bits out. Oh, look, there's so many Pandora's boxes here, I don't know what to open. I've got the last one I have here is the sovereignty of life forms, and I sort of covered that in the first place. Oh, look, okay, I'll open one more little one. Pirates, predators and parasites. There are lots of different life forms interacting with humans, and one of the ones which people don't understand are what we'd call demonic entities, negative entities, lower astral entities. You've got a lot of non-physical life forms which are part of creation and have a valid right to exist. We would label them as humans as evil or nasty purely because they feed off our emotional output. Specifically, the ones I'm talking about feed off fear. Their favourite thing is self-hatred. If you hate yourself, you attract these little entities to you. As surely as you're walking through the rainforest with a cut foot, you're going to attract leeches. Now, on the subject of leeches, do you think leeches are evil? horrible creatures? No. You know that if you're dripping blood, or if you've got good healthy blood and you're in a rainforest, the leech is going to come along, because that's what leeches do, and you accept it. You might not like them, you might be revolted by them, but you wouldn't go around saying they're the evil, horrible, evil things. They're part of creation. They're looking for their food source. Well, these little entities that people out there get rid of all the time, and so you should. But they're attracted to us in the first place because a lot of humans broadcast energy frequencies which are food and nourishment for them. We had a chap come out to several of the Nexus conferences called Dr. Harry Oldfield. He has the technology to show you on the screen, live time, any attached parasitic entities on humans. And it is mind-blowing, that whole concept. I really recommend you dig up the Nexus conference lectures of Dr. Harry Oldfield on that. But I just want to summarise, I've got a couple of minutes. What he found, and this is really interesting because most of you have been in the New Age community, and you know, you've all probably seen people who've had traumas or issues, and they've gone and done a New Age workshop or a course, and they've got it, and they've moved on, etc. The worst type of non-physical parasitic entity, the type of frequency they're attracted to of self-hatred, you or I would probably describe these people as humans who've got some massive, unresolved mental, emotional trauma from their past that's blocking them. That pretty much, I mean, basically in most cases you're talking incest or rape. Sometimes it can be just beatings or emotional violence. But young people, people in their youth, if they're raped or beaten, etc., they develop sometimes alter personalities. There's a lot of self-hatred, a lot of guilt for what occurred to them, even though they were the victim. A lot of these people turn to drugs, alcohol, sex. It depends which chakra is being blown over. But when you look at these people on the screen using Harry Oldfield's technology, you see a human with what you would probably call a hole in their aura. And what's really interesting is it's just like white light coming out of the particular hole. It's like you are, instead of bleeding red blood from the physical, it's like you're broadcasting life energy through this hole in the aura. And non-physical parasitic entities swimming through the ethers go, oh, there's food over there, and they just come and latch on it and start feeding off it. And they look like black slugs on the thing there. Some of them are very intelligent and they can get inside your head and they want to perpetuate your self-hatred. So they're the voices in their heads of the people who go out and encourage you to kill people or stab that person or rape, kill, plunder. Because the host is going to feel really bad, really guilty and pour out more of this grief and stuff. Not a nice situation, and you would hope that eventually the background frequency of this planet which is rising all the time, is going to rise to the point where those parasitic entities can't physically exist here. So pay a lot of attention to people who've got these unresolved emotional traumas. Take them to New Age groups or give them a second look, because a lot of these people have those parasites attracted to them. Ouija boards, no secret, everyone here probably knows if you're not doing the right rituals or whatever you believe in, and it's more the belief in the ritual rather than the ritual itself that has the power. The thing about Ouija boards is, and again I've noticed all through this, free will is always obeyed more than you realise. And if you're working a Ouija board, you've usually gone to the situation where you have asked for contact out there. You've invited any kid who's doing a Ouija board, anyone who puts out the invitation. That means you've chosen to have the experience, and there are some not nice entities will come down, or there's some really nice ones. It sort of depends what you are scheduled to go through and experience. But it's all real, and it's taken very seriously by the people who run the planet. They are totally... If you've ever met and dealt with people at the top of the food chain, they actually go to conferences like this. They meditate, they believe in reincarnation. They're just a bit different from you guys. They believe the ends justify the means. If you ever get an email from me, you'll see my signature is, the ends don't justify the means, on the contrary. How you do something determines the outcome. And in the future, I predict that the dividing line between people will be those who believe the ends justifies the means and those who don't. And think about it as you go home tonight, because I think it's one of the really big determinants. I mean, the people who brought this home to me most were special forces people who, after decades of being assassins and SAS and elite things, they've all got consciences, and a lot of those people have been told they've got to kill this village, don't do it, don't question it, just orders, etc. when you go killing people who, for whatever reason, a lot of people out there who are good people to start with, it eats them up, and they want to go and they want to talk to people. I've actually had a few of those people come to me and have long conversations on the condition I don't name them or put the details down in the magazine. But for me, it gave me an overall sense. But I consistently see one of the biggest things that stuffed up their heads was in their training they are told the ends justify the means. It's okay to kill 10 people if it's going to save 1,000. And if you go down that road of justification, you come into some very nasty places. I'd like to think mankind has explored that line of madness to its nth degree and that we're moving away from it, and that the matter of how you do things is now more important than what you're doing, because how you do things goes out there into the world, it affects the cells of every other living thing. So how you're doing things is going to shape the world you experience more than anything else. And at 6 o'clock on the dot, we all get to go home. Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful audience.